County narcotics officer charged in drug trafficking charges had a spotless record.
Hickox is facing up to 40 years in prison if convicted.
As a decorated sergeant with the Nassau County Sheriff's Office and a deputized task force officer with the DEA in Jacksonville, Florida, Hickox held a position of high trust and authority. He was embedded in federal narcotics investigations with direct access to evidence, intelligence, and operations targeting drug traffickers across the region. But between 2017 and 2023, Hickox used that trusted role not to enforce the law, but to break it. Over the course of 6 years, Hickox quietly built a criminal enterprise from inside law enforcement. He began by stealing seized drugs from secure evidence storage, including more than 1,000 pounds of marijuana and at least a kilogram of cocaine. He forged DEA records, falsified destruction forms, and tampered with evidence logs to hide the thefts. In one bold case, he replaced real cocaine with a 3D printed replica, dusted with actual powder to pass basic inspections. This wasn't just about theft. Hickox was moving product. He teamed up with a Florida Highway Patrol trooper named José I. Together, they sold the stolen drugs through street-level dealers across Florida. The two officers made over $420,000 in illegal profits. Hickox never reported a cent to the IRS. Instead, he laundered the money through hidden bank accounts, cash transactions, and untraceable channels. For years, the operation stayed under the radar. But in late 2022, internal audits at the DEA revealed irregularities in evidence documentation. Items listed as destroyed couldn't be accounted for. Logs had unexplained gaps. That's when a whistleblower from the Nassau County Sheriff's Office stepped forward with internal files implicating Hickox directly. A joint investigation was launched by the FBI and the DEA's Office of Professional Responsibility. What they uncovered was a complete abuse of power from within. On the 10th of March, 2023, federal agents executed a search warrant at Hickox's home. Inside, they found a trove of illegal activity: narcotics, including fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine pills; a rifle illegally modified to fire as a fully automatic weapon; 4 additional firearms, one with its serial number obliterated, and nearly $200,000 in cash. Hidden in various locations throughout the property, Hickox was arrested and indicted on multiple federal charges: conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, falsification of government documents, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and tax fraud. In May 2024, he pleaded guilty to all major charges. "I stand here today as a guilty man," Hickox said during his sentencing. On the 27th of January, 2025, Hickox was sentenced to 17 years and 6 months in federal prison. His partner, Trooper Ray, received a 9-year sentence. But the damage didn't end there. Dozens of criminal cases tied to Hickox were immediately dismissed. Many others were placed under review. Defense attorneys across the region began challenging convictions based on evidence Hickox had handled. Prosecutors faced the massive task of determining which investigations were legitimate and which were now compromised. One local official summed it up bluntly: "He didn't just disgrace the badge, he corrupted the foundation of the justice system." The story of James Darrell Hickox isn't just about a corrupt officer. It's about what happens when power is unchecked, oversight fails, and the people sworn to protect the system become the ones who poison it from within. He was meant to be taking down drug traffickers. Instead, he became one. The next agent didn't smuggle drugs or fire a gun, but he still committed one of the boldest crimes in cybercrime history. All he needed was a computer, a badge, and a fake online identity. Behind the shield of his federal authority, he extorted criminals on the dark web, funneled stolen Bitcoin into his personal accounts, and nearly destroyed one of the most significant cybercrime investigations in American history from the inside. Carl Mark Force was a respected DEA special agent, handpicked for an elite task force assigned to tackle the Silk Road, the dark web's notorious marketplace for drugs, weapons, and illegal activities. While other agents chased criminals on the streets, Force operated undercover online, tasked with infiltrating Silk Road, gathering intel, and taking down its creator, Ross Ulbricht, famously known online as Dread Pirate Roberts. At first, Force stuck to the plan, skillfully embedding himself within the hidden community under the alias Knob. He earned trust quickly, regularly interacting with Ulbricht himself. But soon enough, Force gave in to temptation. Greed took over, and he began crossing ethical and legal boundaries. Using a fake identity called French Maid, Force secretly contacted Ulbricht, claiming to have inside DEA information. He offered to sell this intelligence for Bitcoin. Ulbricht, desperate to protect his multi-million-dollar empire, took the bait and paid Force. Instead of reporting this transaction, Force pocketed the cryptocurrency, meticulously hiding his tracks and funneling stolen Bitcoin into private accounts, convinced he'd never be caught. Force's corruption didn't stop there. Without authorization, he infiltrated CoinMKT, a digital currency exchange, posing as a compliance officer. Pretending to act on official business, he froze a customer's account containing about $300,000 in Bitcoin, transferring it directly into his own wallet. To cover his tracks, he continued creating fake identities, deleting digital evidence, and fabricating reports. He thought his technical knowledge and insider status made him untouchable, but Force drastically underestimated one crucial detail: blockchain's transparency. Eventually, suspicious digital transactions raised red flags. Federal investigators launched a forensic investigation tracing the digital trail directly back to Force. In March 2015, Karl Mark Force was arrested and charged with money laundering, wire fraud, theft of government property, and obstruction of justice. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty. In October 2015, he received a sentence of 78 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay back $337,000. The fallout from Force's actions went beyond his personal disgrace. During Ross Ulbricht's high-profile trial, prosecutors hid Force's corruption from the jury, a revelation that later sparked outrage and raised serious questions about fairness, transparency, and the integrity of the entire investigation. Karl Mark Force didn't just corrupt a federal investigation, he severely undermined public trust in law enforcement, exposing troubling vulnerabilities in America's fight against cybercrime. But the next DEA agent didn't hide behind a keyboard. He was on the ground, working international cases, running undercover operations, and seizing millions. Only, the money didn't all make it back to the DEA, because while he claimed to be fighting cartels, he was taking their cash, flying first class, and partying across Europe. José I wasn't just any DEA agent. Fluent in Spanish, stationed in international hotspots like Cartagena, and praised for his undercover skills, he was seen as a rising star in the agency. But while the DEA thought he was chasing drug cartels, Irizarry was secretly running a criminal enterprise of his own. Over nearly a decade, Irizarry stole more than $9 million from DEA undercover accounts. This money was seized from traffickers and was intended to fund investigations. Instead, he siphoned it into secret bank accounts around the world. And he didn't act alone. Irizarry built a network of co-conspirators that included other agents, informants, and even foreign customs officials. Together, they funneled dirty money across borders, laundering it with alarming ease. The stolen cash paid for a lavish lifestyle. Irizarry bought luxury cars, expensive jewelry, and booked first-class trips for him and his wife. He used official DEA travel to mask private vacations, visiting five-star hotels, attending VIP sporting events, and throwing extravagant parties, all under the cover of federal business. Behind the scenes, Irizarry and his crew joked about it. They called themselves Team America, treating the global drug war like a free ride funded by cartel money. But their recklessness eventually caught up with them. Irizarry went to great lengths to keep his scheme hidden. He used fake names to open bank accounts. He filed false DEA reports to cover the paper trail. He even manipulated DEA operations, choosing money pickup locations not based on law enforcement strategy, but on where it benefited him and his partners the most. One key player in his circle, Omar Ambuila, a Colombian customs official who took bribes to help move the money internationally. That official's daughter later posted vacation photos from luxury resorts on social media. Those images raised red flags and helped spark the investigation that would bring it all down. In 2020, José I pleaded guilty to 19 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit money laundering, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His wife, Natalia Gomez Irizarry, also pleaded guilty for her role in the operation. The case rocked the DEA. An internal review revealed how Irizarry operated for years with virtually no oversight. It exposed major flaws in the agency's systems, especially in tracking informant funds and managing international operations. Even after the dust settled, the DEA's public review of the scandal barely mentioned Irizarry. That silence drew heavy criticism from lawmakers and watchdog groups who accused the agency of trying to downplay one of the largest corruption scandals in its history. José I didn't just steal millions, he compromised the credibility of the very agency tasked with fighting the war on drugs. His story is a stark reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked and accountability falls through the cracks. But while Irizarry used the DEA to fund his lifestyle, the next agent used the badge to build a full-scale trafficking ring inside U.S. borders. He was a decorated lawman, a martial arts champion, and even a Hollywood actor. But behind the scenes, he was stealing drugs straight from DEA evidence vaults and distributing heroin with his own network. Darnell Garcia looked like a model federal agent. He served in the U.S. Army, was a martial arts champion trained by Chuck Norris, and even had a brief acting career, appearing in the classic film Enter the Dragon. By the time he joined the DEA in the 1980s, Garcia had built a resume that inspired trust. But beneath the image of discipline and service, he was hiding a far darker reality. Assigned to the DEA's Los Angeles division during a time when the city was a hotspot for narcotics trafficking, Garcia wasn't cracking down on drug rings. He was running one. Between 1983 and 1987, Garcia, along with fellow DEA agents John Jackson and Wayne Countryman, orchestrated one of the most brazen theft schemes in agency history. In one instance, the trio stole approximately 400 pounds of cocaine from a stash house. In another, they removed over 2 pounds of heroin directly from DEA-controlled evidence vaults. Instead of logging or destroying the narcotics, they repackaged and resold them through their own trafficking network. The profits were funneled into offshore accounts and shell companies, carefully hidden from view. Garcia's sudden wealth raised eyebrows. He bought expensive homes, drove high-end cars, and lived far beyond what a federal salary could explain. There were rumors of exotic vacations, private parties, and luxurious purchases paid for in cash. He flaunted his wealth openly, yet the source remained hidden until the walls started closing in. The scheme began to unravel when internal discrepancies in the DEA's evidence logs clashed with federal financial audits. Garcia and his partners had been careful, but not careful enough. Investigators picked up on missing inventory, unaccounted-for transactions, and unexplained spikes in Garcia's lifestyle. In 1988, the three agents were formally indicted. But Garcia wasn't ready to face justice. He fled the United States and disappeared overseas, sparking an international manhunt. He was eventually located in Luxembourg, living under an alias. After his arrest, he was extradited back to the U.S. and stood trial in 1991. Garcia was convicted on multiple charges, including drug trafficking, money laundering, theft of government property, and conspiracy. The scale of the operation stunned prosecutors. He was sentenced to 80 years in federal prison and fined more than $1.1 million. Despite the harsh sentence, Garcia served only 21 years before being released in 2011. His case became a symbol of systemic failure. Garcia had operated a full-scale drug distribution ring from within the very agency tasked with stopping such crimes. His betrayal exposed significant weaknesses in the DEA's internal controls, especially in how evidence was managed and agents were supervised. Oversight mechanisms failed repeatedly, allowing Garcia and his crew to steal, smuggle, and profit without detection for years. The fallout from his crimes went beyond the courtroom. Garcia's actions undermined public confidence in the DEA and raised serious questions about oversight, accountability, and the ease with which insiders could exploit the system. Lawmakers demanded reforms, and internal audits were overhauled to prevent similar breaches. But those efforts have fallen short. As recent cases show, corrupt DEA agents continue to exploit weaknesses in the system, proving that the threat from within remains very real. And while Garcia built a drug empire out of DEA vaults, the next agent worked from the outside, but still had access to everything. Nathan Cohen had all the hallmarks of a successful DEA agent. He joined the agency in 2002 and spent more than a decade climbing the ranks, eventually becoming a group supervisor. It was a position of trust, one that came with oversight, operational control, and privileged access to classified intelligence. But behind the badge, Cohen was running a double game. Instead of dismantling drug networks, he was secretly working to protect one, and it all centered around a familiar name, Francisco Benitez. Cohen had once arrested Benitez, who later agreed to cooperate with the DEA as an informant. But when Benitez stopped working with law enforcement, Cohen saw an opportunity, not for justice, but for profit. According to court documents, Cohen approached Benitez with a deal: get back into drug trafficking, and Cohen would offer protection. Not just a blind eye, real protection, inside tips, warnings about surveillance, information that could keep Benitez one step ahead of law enforcement. Benitez agreed, and from 2014 to 2018, Cohen accepted at least $31,500 in bribes. In return, he gave Benitez a stream of sensitive information. He warned him about phone numbers and addresses under investigation, gave advice on trafficking methods, and even suggested shifting operations from mail-based deliveries to overland trucking. The goal wasn't just to keep Benitez out of jail. It was to help him expand. But in 2018, the walls began to close in. The FBI received a tip from Benitez, who had flipped once again, this time to help set up a sting. In December of that year, Cohen and Benitez met in Las Vegas. They walked into a hotel bathroom. Cohen walked out with $9,000 in cash. The entire exchange was recorded. Days later, after returning to Arkansas, Cohen was arrested. He was charged with bribery, and as the investigation unfolded, more damning evidence surfaced. Agents uncovered links to methamphetamine distribution, suggesting that Cohen's protection may have enabled the movement of between 15 and 45 kilograms of meth. In August 2021, Cohen pleaded guilty in federal court. He was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in prison, along with 2 years of supervised release. During sentencing, the judge dismissed Cohen's claim that financial hardship had driven his actions. The court made it clear this wasn't desperation, it was calculated betrayal. Cohen's case was particularly devastating because of his rank. He wasn't just a corrupt agent, he was a leader. His fall cast a shadow over the agency supervised and raised questions about every case he touched. The people he once trained and directed were left questioning whether their work had been compromised from the inside. Another cautionary tale, another crack in the armor of public trust, and yet another reminder that when power is abused behind closed doors, the damage can stretch far beyond a single name or conviction. And if you think this was bad, keep watching. The next case takes corruption to a whole new level. Chad Scott, the DEA agent who framed suspects, falsified evidence, and brought others down with him. Chad Scott was once considered a star agent in the DEA's New Orleans field office. For years, he led major drug investigations across Louisiana and the Gulf Coast, earning a reputation for being aggressive, relentless, and incredibly effective. His high arrest numbers and courtroom wins made him a standout in the southeastern United States. But behind the scenes, his success was built on lies. Scott wasn't just cutting corners, he was corrupting the system. For over a decade, he manipulated evidence, coerced testimony, and pressured witnesses to cooperate under threat or in exchange for favors. His brand of justice wasn't about law and order, it was about winning at all costs. In one of the most disturbing cases, Scott planted drugs in a suspect's vehicle, filed a false report, and then lied under oath to help convict the man. That man was Julius Surtees. In 2005, Scott coerced Surtees into fabricating testimony against another defendant, promising him leniency in exchange for false statements. Surtees spent years in federal prison, based entirely on manufactured evidence orchestrated by Scott, and that was no isolated incident. Scott regularly instructed informants and fellow officers to alter or omit facts from their reports. He told witnesses exactly what to say in court. In return, they were promised leniency or other benefits. In one case, Scott convinced a suspect to purchase a $43,000 pickup truck and then seized it under false pretenses, keeping the vehicle for his own use. Colleagues and informants knew better than to cross him. Scott made sure those around him stayed quiet or played along. He blurred the lines between enforcement and intimidation, and he used his position to maintain control over those within his reach. The turning point came in 2016, when 2 members of Scott's task force were arrested for stealing money and drugs. Under pressure, they cooperated with federal investigators, and what they revealed was a decade-long pattern of misconduct, all pointing back to Scott. The revelations led to a multi-year federal investigation and 2 separate criminal trials. In the first, Scott was convicted of perjury and obstruction of justice for directing false testimony in a case against a Houston-based drug suspect. In the second trial, even more serious misconduct came to light. Falsified DEA paperwork, planted evidence, and coordinated efforts to cover up improper actions. In 2021, Chad Scott was sentenced to 13 years and 4 months in federal prison. His convictions included obstruction of justice, conspiracy, falsification of official records, and perjury. The Department of Justice issued a public statement condemning his actions as a fundamental betrayal of the public trust. The consequences rippled far beyond his own conviction. Multiple cases Scott had worked on were reopened, reviewed, or overturned. One of them involved Isaiah Keith, who was wrongfully convicted based on false testimony and investigative misconduct tied directly to Scott. Keith's conviction was eventually overturned, and he was released from prison. Another victim of a system manipulated from within was the case of Lamar Burks, a Houston man who was convicted of murder in 1997 and spent more than 2 decades behind bars. New evidence suggested that Scott and his team had tampered with witnesses, coerced testimony, and buried exculpatory information, casting serious doubt on the integrity of Burks's conviction. Civil rights advocates, including the Houston chapter of the NAACP, have since called for a full federal investigation into the handling of the case, citing it as a clear example of how unchecked power within law enforcement can lead to irreversible harm. His misconduct raised serious questions about the oversight and accountability of DEA task forces, not just in New Orleans, but across the Gulf South. Scott's case serves as yet another reminder. When power goes unchecked, justice can be twisted to serve personal agendas. What looked like dedication from the outside was, in reality, a years-long abuse of power, one that left innocent lives ruined and the credibility of an entire agency shaken. And after decades in law enforcement, some agents walk away from the job entirely. Others find new ways to stay connected, legally or not. What happens when experience and access fall into the wrong hands? The next case shows how insider knowledge became a valuable commodity, sold to the highest bidder. Manny R served for more than 2 decades in the DEA, rising to the role of assistant special agent in charge at the Miami field office. By the time he retired in 2018, R had access to some of the DEA's most sensitive data: sealed indictments, confidential informants, upcoming operations, and active drug investigations. But retirement didn't end his connection to law enforcement. It simply changed the business model. After leaving the DEA, R became a private investigator for Miami-based defense attorneys who specialized in representing drug traffickers. What they needed was inside information, and R knew exactly where to get it. All he needed was someone still on the inside. That person was John Costanzo Jr., a longtime DEA supervisor, second-generation agent, and close friend. Costanzo had spent years working high-level drug and money laundering cases across Miami and Washington, D.C. He was seen as dependable, experienced, and above suspicion. But while sitting behind a desk with access to the DEA's most sensitive systems, he began feeding that intel to R. Together, they ran a covert pipeline of classified DEA intelligence. R would make specific requests, sealed indictments, target lists, and internal DEA database entries from Natus. Costanzo would deliver. That information was then passed to defense attorneys, who used it to sign clients early, build legal strategies, and even help suspects avoid arrest altogether. In exchange for this access, Costanzo was paid over $100,000 in bribes. The payments were carefully disguised. A $50,000 down payment on a Coral Gables townhouse, luxury plane tickets, sham consulting invoices funneled through Resio's PI firm, and even payments routed through Costanzo's father, a retired DEA agent himself. To cover their tracks, the pair used burner phones, deleted communications, and created fake paperwork to legitimize the transactions. It worked for a while. The scheme unraveled when a DEA informant, Jorge Hernandez, stepped forward. A former cocaine trafficker known as Boliche, Hernandez began working with the FBI, secretly recording conversations that exposed Resio and Costanzo's operation. The recordings captured them discussing exact case details, payment amounts, and timelines. In 2023, both men were indicted. A jury found them guilty of bribery, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and honest services wire fraud. In April 2024, Costanzo was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Resio received a 3-year sentence. In court, Resio admitted that greed drove his actions. Just weeks after his retirement, he purchased a 2021 Porsche Macan, paid for in part with bribe money. The scandal didn't end with their convictions. Prosecutors are currently reviewing more than 1,000 communications between Resio and defense attorneys who allegedly financed the arrangement. 2 attorneys in particular have come under scrutiny: David Macy and Luis Guerra. Macy, a prominent Miami defense lawyer, has been formally charged with bribery. He allegedly provided cash and gifts, including Yankees-Red Sox baseball tickets, in exchange for classified DEA information that helped him gain an edge in high-profile drug cases. Guerra, another well-known figure in Miami's legal scene, has not been charged but remains under federal investigation. In recorded conversations, Guerra was heard discussing how they were scheming about how we're going to make money, raising serious concerns about ethical conduct and legal integrity within the defense bar. The Costanzo-Resio case closed a disturbing loop: a retired agent exploiting decades of access and a trusted supervisor still inside the agency using his position to profit from the very system he swore to uphold. It was, as the Department of Justice described, a stunning breach of duty. But the next agent didn't just leak information or collect bribes. He spent over a decade protecting organized crime, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. He erased names from DEA reports, warned his childhood friends when investigations got too close, and helped keep traffickers in business. For more than 10 years, Joseph Bongiovanni served as a DEA agent in Buffalo, New York, assigned to investigate the very drug networks he would later shield. He wasn't just accepting bribes. He was tipping off traffickers, many of whom were personal friends, ensuring they stayed in operation. According to court records, Bongiovanni used his badge to protect individuals connected to organized crime, including members of the Buffalo Mafia and the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. His protection came in many forms. He warned suspects about surveillance, pressured fellow agents to drop investigations, and even omitted names from DEA reports to keep his associates off the radar. The bribes he received totaled at least $250,000, often funneled through intermediaries and delivered in cash or favors. Another protected associate was Michael Masecchia, a former Buffalo schoolteacher who became a high-level drug trafficker. Masecchia distributed marijuana, cocaine, and fentanyl pills throughout the region. In return for protection, Bongiovanni warned him of investigations and leaked the identities of confidential informants, ensuring Masecchia could operate with minimal risk. One key figure in the conspiracy was Peter Gerase Jr., owner of Pharaoh's Gentlemen's Club, a business linked to drugs, human trafficking, and violent crime. Rather than pursue an investigation, Bongiovanni allegedly ordered agents to leave him alone. Over time, the consequences became obvious. Informants disappeared. Drug targets slipped through cracks. Cases tied to Bongiovanni's task force kept collapsing. By 2021, investigators began piecing together a federal corruption case. They reviewed Bongiovanni's case files, traced his financial records, and uncovered inconsistencies between his reports and DEA communications. In October 2024, Bongiovanni was convicted on 7 federal charges, including obstruction of justice, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, false statements to law enforcement, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Prosecutors revealed he created fake case files, sabotaged investigations, and concealed informant identities to protect criminal allies. More than 60 witnesses testified in the trial. The jury found him guilty, though a mistrial was declared on 12 additional charges, which are scheduled for retrial in mid-2025. Bongiovanni now faces up to 20 years in prison, with sentencing set for the 9th of June, 2025. Until then, he remains under court supervision and is monitored with an electronic ankle bracelet. His attorney has signaled plans to appeal. Meanwhile, the fallout continues. The DEA is now reviewing dozens of cases Bongiovanni worked on, knowing full well that many could be thrown out due to compromised evidence and tainted investigations. But Bongiovanni's case wasn't just about bending the rules. The next man created a fake federal identity, fooled contractors, officials, and even real agents. Garrison Courtney once worked as a public affairs officer for the Drug Enforcement Administration, but he was never a special agent. He never carried a badge or ran investigations. Still, that didn't stop him from pulling off one of the boldest frauds in recent federal history by claiming he was actually a covert CIA operative. Courtney leveraged his past government experience and spun it into an elaborate cover story. He told defense contractors, private companies, and even high-ranking officials that he was working undercover for a classified national security program tied to the CIA. He used insider jargon, fake documentation, and the threat of legal consequences to keep people from asking too many questions. To sell the story, he asked companies to secretly place him on their payrolls, claiming it was part of maintaining his non-official cover. In return, he promised that once the mission was declassified, those companies would receive millions in federal contracts. But there was no mission, no CIA connection, and no contracts. From 2012 to 2016, Courtney defrauded at least a dozen companies out of more than $4.4 million. He created fake paperwork bearing DEA and DOJ letterhead, routed payments through shell companies, and used multiple aliases to maintain the illusion. He funneled payments through fraudulent accounts, manipulated timelines, and even convinced real federal employees to vouch for him, believing they were assisting a legitimate covert program. His victims included defense contractors, tech firms, and government consultants, all duped into funding what they thought was a top-secret mission. One of the individuals who helped unravel the scheme was then Lieutenant General Robert Otto, head of Air Force Intelligence. After meeting with Courtney and sensing inconsistencies, Otto began cooperating with the FBI. He wore a wire during subsequent meetings, providing key evidence that exposed the fraud. By 2019, a federal audit flagged Courtney's involvement in suspicious payment streams. The investigation revealed that he had blurred the lines between fiction and national security so well that even seasoned professionals fell for it. In 2020, Courtney was arrested and pleaded guilty to wire fraud, impersonating a federal officer, money laundering, and theft of government funds. He was sentenced in October of that year to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.4 million in restitution. The court called his conduct breathtaking in scope and deception. What made it especially dangerous was how close his fiction came to real federal operations. Courtney's story didn't just fool companies. It damaged public trust in legitimate intelligence and law enforcement programs. 10 agents, one system, each story a different face of betrayal. Some stole cash, others sold secrets. A few turned federal power into a personal criminal enterprise. But every one of them proved the same truth. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones wearing a government ID. If you want more deep dives, more real cases, and more untold stories from inside America's most powerful agencies, subscribe and drop a comment and let us know, who should we investigate next? Thanks for watching.